Hi again, everybody. This is the Course of World History. I'm Mr. Samuelson, and today we're going to be talking about the Crusades. All of them. It's going to be long, but we're going to get through it. Let's get through our essential question first. What was the primary cause of the Crusades, and what were the results of the Crusades? So, cause. Islamic expansion. So, the Islamic Empire had been expanding. They'd faced very few serious defeats in their first 200 years, right? And then they expanded out and just totally conquered all the southern Mediterranean world and out east into Persia and most of Spain. They were doing really well. With little effort, they had conquered huge territories of land. And as they expanded, they incorporated lots of non-Arabs, non-Muslims into their empire. The Seljuk Turks come around a little bit later. The Seljuk Turks were this Turkic tribe from Central Asia, over here, even north of there. The Seljuks took advantage of this fracturing Eastern Islamic Empire as they got into conflicts largely between a couple of families, the Umayyads and the Fatimids, over who would be in control. The Seljuks were able to come in and conquered the eastern third of the Islamic world. This territory right here, what we kind of think of as the heart of the Islamic world, comes under the control of Seljuk Turks, non-Arab people. They're Turkish. The Seljuks, however, were less tolerant of non-Islamic faiths than other Islamic rulers had been. So all that religious tolerance we talked about in previous lessons, how Islam was really accommodating to Christianity and Judaism, the Seljuks not so much. They wanted a Muslim empire. Now, the Byzantines were particularly threatened by this, being non-Muslim themselves and having a lot of their former subjects conquered by the Seljuks. They ask for assistance. They reach out to Western Europe and they say, hey, the Seljuks are a huge problem. We can't handle this. For the sake of Christianity, please come out and aid us. And in 1095, Pope Urban II calls for a crusade, the First Crusade, to go out and beat up on the Seljuks, or in specific terms, the crusade was called to capture the Holy Land, Jerusalem, and return it to Christian leadership. Now, the Byzantines really meant, hey, come out and help us recapture it. The Pope kind of takes it in a different direction. They're not going to give it to the Byzantines, but they will have their war. Many European noblemen do respond to this call. So we have the First Crusade. This First Crusade was called by Pope Urban II in response to Byzantine requests for aid against the Seljuk Turks. Crusaders, particularly from France and southern Italy, a group known as the Normans, really sought out conquest, and they wanted to capture and hold these lands. So they are the first to really go out. They're able to attack, win some battles against the Seljuks and take over some land. And they were able to capture these lands right here, formerly held by the Seljuk Turks, and they created Crusader states, little kingdoms and principalities of their own. They didn't give it back to the Byzantines. No. Did you really think we were going to give them back, Byzantines? Oh, that's cute. No, we're going to keep our land. Thank you very much. The Second Crusade comes around a little while later, and this was where King Louis, the Seventh of France, and King Conrad III of Germany, Holy Roman Empire, marched to Jerusalem and then attack Damascus. They're going to try to push this victory out a little bit further. So they go to the Crusader state here, and they try to march inland to Damascus, a major city within the Seljuk Empire. They do not succeed here. The second attack fails. The Crusaders return to Europe. The Second Crusade amounted to nothing. It was the Christians trying to expand on the victories of the First Crusades and not doing so. It was a win for the Seljuks. The Third Crusade fought in 1187 to 1192. Here we have Saladin, this guy right here, strong, handsome fella. He is able to reunite the Islamic world. Okay, he's able to stop the internal squabbling. He's able to reassert himself and Now a unified, focused Islamic world is going to take these crusades very seriously. And they march in and they recapture most of those crusader states. Jerusalem falls to Saladin in 1187. Now, armies from England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire set out to stop this. They're going to stop Saladin. They're going to turn Saladin back. And no, they're not going to do either of those, because Saladin he's large and in charge. Like, he's no joke. He's focused, determined, organized. He is going to push back these crusaders. In return for the crusaders admitting defeat and leaving without any more fight, Saladin does make an agreement to allow unarmed pilgrims to visit Jerusalem, but that's it. It's going to remain under his control. The crusaders may not have it back. So Third Crusade, chalk that up as another loss for the crusaders. So the Fourth Crusade comes around. This one is messed up. The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204, was supposed to capture Jerusalem. This was what it was called for. The Pope called out, hey, we're doing another crusade. Hey, come help us capture Jerusalem. Hey, this is a holy war to push back against the Islamic Empire. The Crusaders hire a bunch of Venetians. Venice is a city in Italy. Got a very strong fleet. They're going to sail them all the way to Constantinople, and then they'll be able to go from there into the crusading lands. But they arrive in Constantinople, and they're all like, hey, we don't actually have any money to pay for you. So the Venetians are like, you got to pay. You got to pay. This was the arrangement. You got to pay us for this transport. So the Crusaders simply say, well, we're not going to make it to Jerusalem. We can't afford that. But there's a really rich city right here in Constantinople. And the Fourth Crusade then becomes this war between the Venetians, who have now co-opted the Crusaders, and the Byzantine Empire and the city of Constantinople. And Venice and the Crusaders, with Constantinople not expecting this attack, are able to attack and capture it. Venice is able to seize coastal lands in Greece and becomes a part of Venetian control. And the Crusaders wind up in charge of Constantinople. The first time this city had ever been defeated was defeated by Christians who were coming to help them recapture land against a non-Christian foe. The Fourth Crusade, my friends, messed up. The Crusaders were excommunicated by the Pope, right? The Pope in Rome had called a holy war against Muslims, and they had sacked and defeated the strongest Christian city in the world. The Pope didn't like that. They were kicked out of the church. Later Crusades, there are 3 more major ones and a bunch of little minor ones that we are not going to waste your time with. But just know that over the next 100 years, Jerusalem does change hands a couple more times. The true Crusades, the one that we label as Crusades, are always called with the purpose of capturing or recapturing the Holy Land. A crusade was to capture or recapture Jerusalem. And there were 7 attempts to do this. But by 1272, no further serious efforts are made by Europeans to take Jerusalem. They realize they can't do it. They are not organized. They are not wealthy enough. The Islamic empires, the people in charge of that area, are just too strong to resist. One, however, that is worth mentioning is the Reconquista. This is a non-crusade crusade because they weren't recapturing the Holy Land. But this was a 700-year struggle between Muslims and Christians in Spain, with the borders kind of moving up and moving back and moving up and moving back. As Islam and the West really focused on this, Spain was just doing the Reconquista. They weren't sending crusaders off to Jerusalem. They wanted Spain to be Christian again. And slowly, these Spanish Christian kingdoms do drive both Muslims and Jews out of the peninsula. Jews, which had been tolerated, encouraged by the Umayyads, who were still kind of in Spain for most of this time, living in Cordoba, thriving in Cordoba, got kicked out by the Christian leaders once they retook this territory. So those left behind, let's go back to the Holy Land. When the Ottoman Empire, and we will talk a lot about the Ottomans, were able to conquer this Holy Land, many Frankish Christians remained there. A lot of crusaders were still physically in that territory. Some were killed in the fighting of the Crusades, right? It's violence, but a lot of them weren't, and just remained Christians living in this territory and remain there today, particularly in Lebanon and in Turkey. A lot of those crusaders, those Franks, were still there. So religious conflict. The nature of the Crusades as a religious-specific conflict has shaped the nature of a lot of the East-West relations in the world ever since then. The memory of the Crusades is really alive and well in the minds of those who still live in the region. Every now and again, people do silly things like putting Crusader crosses on modern military uniforms. That's kind of a surefire way to make the people of the region not like you. They're going to see you as a religious warrior. Modern impact of stuff like this, the politics of the Middle East really do continue to be shaped by the Crusades. Western interference in Middle Eastern affairs invariably draws a lot of criticism. People start to say that this is a new crusade, that the West is once again trying to come in and take over how we live our lives. When the US sent troops to defend Saudi Arabia in the 1990s, right? This is Saudi Arabia. This is where Mecca and Medina is. Extremists within the Muslim faith, and it was just the extremists, really did see this as like another crusade. This is crusaders entering the Holy Land. They've made it all the way to Mecca and Medina. Not literally, but pretty close. And this language is still used to draw up the violence. And 9/11, 2001 was partially a result of this US troops being in Saudi Arabia. And the call by extremists to say that the West is engaging in another crusade, we must stop them. So the impacts of the crusade have trickled into the world still. That's all I've got for you today on the Crusades. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I'll see you next time. Farewell.